Hi there, and welcome to Just Thinking. It's been 3 months since Carolyn Dykema joined me to have a conversation about what's going on at the State House and in her life too. But at any rate, so here we've gone another quarter of a year and we're back. And hi, welcome Carolyn. How are you?
Great to be here. Always appreciate the invitation, Mary.
You got winter's so yucky. This last week or two has just been disgusting.
Although the nice new snow is kind of nice with the white, clean.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for it to go.
End of winter.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done. So you are in a new legislative session, and these days, just refresher course for me in my lifetime, sessions actually were only 1 year. Now your bills will carry two.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing to talk about because it is an interesting time, and you know the public might be interested in kind of what the process is. And how we set up for our legislative session, and then of course the budget, which is our first major piece of legislation that we look at. So our session is 2 years long now, which means that any legislation that's filed and passed starts in January and has to be signed by the governor by the following year, December. So we have a 2-year period to file things, get things through a public hearing, iron out any issues there may be with the bill, get it passed in both the House and the Senate, and then to the governor's desk in a 2-year period.
Used to be only one, though.
And it used to, right.
And it used to have to restart in January and refile and go through the whole process again, which was such a stupid waste.
I believe it is why they went to 2 years, because it gives you a little more time to get things over the hurdles.
Yeah.
So we just started our filing deadline to file new bills was at the end of January, third week in January. So we just finished setting up our committees, because every bill, as you know, has to get assigned to one of, I believe it's 25 committees based on topic matter. And all legislators get assigned to committees as well. So I just got assigned to some new committees this session, which is kind of exciting for me, some really good ones that I'm excited about. One is I am Vice Chair of Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, where there's a lot going on, a lot of climate, clean energy work, resiliency work, things like net metering are through that committee, things like net neutrality come through our committee, and also what we're going to talk about a little bit today, I think, is gas infrastructure, which has been in the news lately. There's going to be a lot of activity in that. I'm also on Ways and Means.
Wow.
Which is great. So going to be playing a up close and personal role in doing the state budget. Oh God, that is such a job. Really, I mean, the senator that I worked for was on it at one point. Oh my God, it's just a lot of work, but good for you. And the budget it's a bill, it's a piece of legislation, but it's the only piece of legislation that passes every year, and it's one that we have to do on the 1-year cycle. So we have to have a balanced budget completed. July 1st, right? By July, right. Most of the time. I'm also on mental health, substance use, and recovery for the first time this session, which the opiate crisis has been perpetually on the legislative docket for at least the last 6 years, and we're just kind of continuing to chip away at that. It's really amazing the breadth of impact that the opiate crisis has on our communities. And I'll just give you an example. Now we're starting to look at things like infants who are born addicted to opiates and what that means, who's going to care for them, how are they going to get medical care. We've got young children who are going to school who have addicted parents who, you know, and they're seeing the mental health trauma concerns in the schools. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of these children having to be cared for by grandparents because parents aren't able to care for them properly. So it's really, you know, it affects virtually every aspect of our lives. And the numbers, you know, while there have been some improvements in certain areas, I would say the overall numbers, you know, still show we have a lot of work to do. And what you may have seen is that the Attorney General now is really ask you about it. Taking Purdue Pharma to task for, you know, it's very reminiscent of the tobacco industry. It is exactly like that. Where the company knew very early on that what they were saying, which was that opiates in low doses, kind of time released, were not addictive. They knew all along that they were, and so the Attorney General's, you know, perspective, as I think many of us agree, is that they owe, you know, they have some responsibility to this financially, and they should be criminally accountable, frankly, for all the deaths that they've caused.
Yeah, no, it is very reminiscent of the cigarettes, because I remember, I mean, I lived through that one, and it was just very, when you think about it, all those years of no, 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 it's no problem, you hear that so much, like right now with other pesticides, you hear it with, you know, fill in the blank, that always business is going to say, no, it's no problem.
Right.
What would you expect? You know?
Right.
Anyway.
So, you know, from a state perspective, one of the things that the governor has proposed and was in his budget that we heard about yesterday at our first Ways and Means hearing was a 50% tax on opiates, which really is a way for them to contribute financially to a lot of the services and supports that we're having to put in place to address the problems related to their product.
I mean, it is expensive, and in human life, there's just no measure. There's just no measure.
Right.
Are you comfortable, happy, whatever the right adjective would be, moving to these committees? These are really not, you know, what happened to agriculture, natural resources?
I know.
You know, those warm and fuzzy ones.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, I find myself gravitating toward infrastructure, which looking at my history, looking at the fact I started here in Holliston on wastewater, you know, and those infrastructure issues,
come around.
It's my comfort spot, I guess. So the fact that I would be put on energy is not surprising. I do things like agriculture. I have a pesticide bill. I still stay very much involved in that. And you don't need to be on the committee to be able to advance these things, and same with child welfare. I've been doing a lot of work with kids and trauma, and I helped set up a task force on to really get stakeholders around the table to look at childhood trauma and how it affects our communities, the lifelong effects of trauma on children, and sort of the nexus to the criminal justice system. And having done some research there, and actually Amber Aronian, who was a great local student who went to Dartmouth, was interning in my office and helped do some research on the connection between childhood trauma and involvement in the juvenile justice system. And as it turns out, you know, the kids that we say are criminals or should be criminally accountable are really just most often had a really tough childhood that affects their brain wiring. You know, if you are traumatized early in your life, it really affects you for the rest of your life.
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
So I still stay involved in all of those a little warmer, fuzzier things. But I'm flattered and glad for the opportunity to be on, in particular, Energy and Ways and Means, which are some pretty influential committees.
So the leadership team in the Democratic Party in the House has changed this year. I mean, you've still got DeLeo at the top, but you've got some new folks.
Right.
Are there any significant differences in terms of philosophies or ideologies that are coming this way?
I would say the ideologies of the building tend to reflect what we hear from outside the building, as it should.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's been a lot of push for things like clean energy and transportation, and I think you're going to see that reflected in the agendas of the House. A notable change, I think, is the number of women in senior roles. So we've got 2 women. The vice chair of Ways and Means is a woman, Denise Garlick from Needham. The assistant vice chair is a woman, Liz Malia from Jamaica Plain. The head of healthcare finance, if not the first time in a very, very long time, is a woman from Lunenburg, Jen Benson. So there's been a lot of female leadership, and you know, as we all know, I think having a balance in the voices that you hear at the table is reflected in what comes out, and I think will result in a more collaborative process that you know, listens to a broad range of voices, which will be a good thing.
When you touched on transportation, and obviously out here, I don't know about you. I don't know how much time you get to be in Holliston when we have peak hours. You know, I'm sure you're stuck in peak hours in Boston, which is even worse. But there used to be peak hours here, but now it basically just blurs together. Is there an acknowledgement or recognition in the State House that all of this gridlock that they have in there is kind of all the way out here and even beyond to Worcester.
Absolutely, and I hear that everywhere, and it's not just Holliston.
Oh, no, it's not.
It's all the major routes. It's 16, it's 135, it's Route 30, all across my district, and you're seeing, I think as you're seeing the growth in the economy and the creation of jobs, which is a good thing, you're also seeing the commensurate level of traffic, and you're seeing more people choose to drive and choose to drive by themselves. Maybe they've got a little more disposable income. So there is a correlation, I think, between economic success and more cars on the road, which is what you're seeing on the Pike. I would say the Pike, just my own personal anecdotal information, which is shown out by the research, is that rush hour is now about 5 hours.
Yeah.
So if you leave anytime between 6:30 and probably 10 o'clock in the morning, you're going to hit essentially commuter hour traffic. And even more interesting, which follows the demographic trends, is that I now see when I'm heading out in the afternoon, you're seeing rush hour traffic heading into Boston in the evening. And I think that is a reflection of a lot of young people choosing to live in Boston. And they're seeing congestion, and the congestion is just making its way out. And I think there is a correlation. We're going to talk a little bit about housing, but there is a correlation between traffic and where the housing is. And I think a lot more people are living
farther away because it's cheaper.
Well, I think both. I think there are a lot of people moving closer to the city because they don't want to sit in congestion, which is causing a lot of housing increase in prices in the city and increased congestion. So I hear from my Boston colleagues, which is a little bit unusual. They're sort of saying, let's share the wealth. We're seeing so much development in downtown Boston. We would like to find ways to share both the residential housing growth in the suburban communities, but also the economic development. They're saying, why don't we have some of these big companies that are locating in Boston, at least part of their footprint out in Metro West, which would be a great thing for us to welcome commercial development. And one of the things that I've been working on, back to the infrastructure piece, is commuter rail. Because I think commuter rail, it has been underinvested in for so long. It's not reliable, it's not frequent enough for people, and I would say it's one of the main concerns that I hear from people is that the trains are late. You can only be late to work so many times.
Yeah, before somebody gets mad at you.
And you can only sit in the train. It's 2 hours on the train is time away from family. If you're trying to get home, when you're stuck. So we need to do more investment in the commuter rail. I think it will take people out of their cars, off the Pike.
You have to do something with the parking where the rails are too.
Absolutely.
When I started commuting by train in 1980, it was the most reliable. I don't think it was late once or twice in the,
I don't think we've put any more money into trains since 1980.
Then, that's the problem. Exactly. Yeah. They're the same trains. I see the cars going by, and it's like I remember that train.
It's true.
And so at that time, it was on time, it was clean, it broke down maybe twice in all of the years I commuted, okay? That was it. Yeah. And then it just, as anything, your house, whatever, if you don't take care of them, they don't last.
Well, and it's amazing, the Big Dig. The Big Dig has left, it really is a great project, and I think it's done wonderful things for the city. But the financial implications of that, are through our entire transportation system. We're still, in many ways, making up for lost time.
Yeah, we were sucked dry. That was 1986 when that all started. So,
but I'm very optimistic about investment in commuter rail. Okay. And we have a very strong ally in Karen Polito, who's the lieutenant governor, who lives in Shrewsbury. She at one point represented Westboro, which I also represent. So she has an affinity for our region. She understands the importance of commuter rail and has worked to set up a working group with legislators to kind of come up with a list of things that we need to see to improve performance, including new locomotives, which we're starting to see some refurbished locomotives, including, additions of a track. There's a third track proposal that would allow for both local trains and express trains to pass each other, so you can have more frequent service without one train getting stuck behind another.
Yep.
And if you have maintenance problems, it allows you to
a way around it,
right? So it doesn't have the domino effect
Yeah.
on the whole system. So there are a lot of capital investments that are going to be on the radar here very soon, and we're going to keep pushing to get some money
I
assigned
would love
to them.
to see Holliston set up something, or not just Holliston, but you know, the regional conversation started, and or really more aggressively, you know, put forward in terms of what we could do locally. I'm thinking there might be a few things that we can do to tinker at around the edges. We can't solve the problem, but are there ways that we can tinker around the edges to encourage employers to use different, you know, start times and that kind of stuff? And you know, I don't know what the answers are, but I'm sure there are a million of them out there. There was just a series done on WBUR. It was a whole week-long series. One week they did transportation, one week they did housing. I think this week is student loans. But you learn an immense amount about what is possible, if not here, you know, that have been done in other parts of the world.
Right.
And you listen to it, and it's like, I think that could work. You know, I'd like to see us talking about that.
And I think employers are talking about it because it is a real productivity issue for them.
Absolutely.
So to the extent that they can have flexible hours, or a lot of people are working from home, as you know. But I think the good news story with transit, they just did a new study on transit usage between 2012 and 2018. And our Worcester-Framingham line showed the greatest growth in usage, up 45% in that 6-year period. So that to me is a good news story about the potential of that line, because that's even given its current challenges. If we can make that a really robust, reliable service, we can do a lot there. But your point about parking is very well taken. As part of this effort, looking at the rail line, we also looked at parking. And we did, I took someone from MBTA along and did a ride through of our stations all along the Worcester-Framingham line to just look at the conditions and show him what our parking situation was like. And I was even surprised at every single stop from Grafton, which is the stop right before Worcester, all the way to Framingham. There was not only capacity parking by 10:30 a.m., it was overcapacity. So you had people parking in in illegal spots that frankly were kind of compromised your ability to get in and out of the station. So we have some additional parking which was designed a long time ago in Westboro but never implemented. We're pushing to get that on the capital plan to have parking put in place there. One of the big challenges is where do you put the parking? You know, there just isn't that much property available, and I would say for anyone out there who may be watching at home, if they are a property owner near, you know, one of the transit stops, Southborough, Westboro, who is looking to maybe make some property available for that kind of thing, I would be happy to talk to them because parking is a big issue. And I know you are always just thinking and kind of thinking long term, and one of the comments that came out of a public hearing we had recently on the transit issue was we don't want to put in place more parking because we don't want to pave over things. We'd like to think that Lyft and Uber are going to be bringing people to the station. We won't need to park people. My solution to that is that's future transit-oriented development, right? I mean, that's something that when parking maybe isn't as necessary in the future, we can convert that to housing, which is also badly needed, and it would be right there by the train station so people can get to work.
Well, my other solution is just a teeny one, but again, if we can get the rail trail to go all the way into Framingham, okay, in all seriousness, there are any number of people who would be happy to ride their bikes from the rail trail into Framingham, park their bike, and get the train. And I agree. It is a connection.
And I was just, Maria Robinson, who's one of the new representatives in Framingham, we've got a pretty close Metro-West delegation, and she, Jack Lewis, and I were talking about the fact that there's a Robert Wideneck brought to my attention, there is a strip of CSX rail in Framingham and a bit in Sherburne that CSX is actually looking to
offload.
Sell.
Okay, good.
And wanted to bring that to the Framingham delegation's attention because of this.
Yeah, link it up because that's just a great,
it's especially a regional need, not just a local need.
Seriously, I mean, you could, a really good biker, you know, cyclist, whichever the right word is. I don't know if one puts you on a Harley and the other one puts you on a bicycle, but at any rate, you know, they don't think negatively. To me, taking a 6-mile ride on a bicycle to get on a train, I probably couldn't do it. But for them,
some can,
and some want to,
and some even do it in the snow and the cold.
Robert would you know. Yeah. But anyway, so that's that. Okay, let's jump to housing. We've both used that magic word a couple of times. Boy, housing is a challenge here for people like me who live in single-family homes. I'm alone in that house, so taking care of all of the mechanicals and all of the structural issues that come along and blah, 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 blah. But there's no place for the person who doesn't need subsidized housing. I'm better off, thank God. Okay, I don't need to use the state services of Cole Court or something like that. But there aren't very many options. And so the selectman, Mark Aronian specifically, has encouraged, the selectman brought it up Monday night, that he wanted to have a affordable housing committee. And so the three of us who were of my age were there talking, but the conversation, it was clear we weren't interested in just over 55 housing. We're talking about young people who, in Mark's case, work for Aronian Landscaping, would really prefer to be able to find a small apartment here for themselves so they don't have to commute to get to work and then work a long day. And then in Warren was talking about, what about rooming houses? I mean, just being able to have a room in a house. Why? I mean, that used to be doable. It used to be possible. When I moved here, it was possible. But, all of the zoning changes for those. And then Warren talked about accessory apartments, and you and I addressed that just quickly before we went on air. But accessory apartments are strictly for family. And why is that? I mean, I understand that everybody was trying to limit the amount of growth and that kind of thing, but you got to turn around and look at that. What's the difference, really? There are so many houses in Holliston that do already have a little apartment tucked into them that people don't even know about. What's the big deal,
And for families, the opportunity to have a little extra income by renting out an apartment would be a win for them too. Excellent. And I think the demographics of this conversation are very interesting, because I hear about it a lot from retirees who want to stay in the area. Yeah. There really isn't the type of housing that you're talking about. And
I want a tiny house. I want a tiny house.
I'm there with you, Mary.
I want a tiny house. I want a little village, a little neighborhood, 10 houses, tiny houses, where we can kind of keep an eye on each other.
Well, this is the baby boomers, right? And the baby boomers are a enormous segment of our population. And if you look at the fact that baby boomers are in their homes, they're looking for alternatives, and there aren't any, and they want to stay in their community, so they're staying in their home. Yeah. And that has ripple effects, because now young families, who might want to move into those homes aren't opening up. Right. And the governor has been talking a lot about this recently. This is not only a family issue and a community issue and a senior issue. This is an economic issue for us.
I was going to say, financially, it's better for the town. Yes, some family's going to move into my house, but I'm going to stay here and I'm going to continue to contribute, and I'm not going to be a big drain on the economy. Whereas if that land that was going to have now 10 older people, they could put, how many houses in there with a whole bunch of kids that will have an effect on the schools. But older people are a freebie, they really are. And and we've lost so many of my friends have just left, moved away. Ashland, Milford, Medway, Franklin.
Right, and you're seeing those communities seeing a resurgence in activity locally. And as you know, we've got very strong home rule here in Massachusetts, where communities, the state tends to more often than not defer responsibility to communities for a lot of these decisions. And I was on the planning board for years, so you see how these decisions are made. And one of the things that that I think is starting to be looked at more, has always been looked at, but looking at more seriously, is the density question. How can we find a way to be smart about allowing increased density in areas that make sense? And earlier when we were talking, you brought up 40B, which I think is an imperfect attempt to encourage communities to do this, to do it in the community's way, so you can get to your 10%, so you don't have these 40B developments coming in. But I think, you know, there are a lot of reasons to do it that aren't just keeping 40B away. You know, it's really a community character issue.
It
and,
is.
We benefit in so many ways from having a diversity of ages and perspectives in our community.
You lose a lot. I mean, some of our best volunteers have moved away, you know? So it's not a good thing for the health of the community. And the middle-aged people are likely to be more mobile. You know, they'll be here for 10 years and move on. And, but you don't find that. Older people are generally, you know, prefer to, especially if their families are here, you know, and I'm lucky enough that mine is here, but there are, you know, any number of friends who are in the same boat.
Well, competitively, you know, you look at someplace like North Carolina that has a little better climate than we do.
Just a teensy.
And, but our calling card economically and why companies choose to come here is our workforce, right? We've got one of the most educated workforces in the country. They want to be here for that reason. If our housing is unaffordable or if our quality of life is not attractive and it takes these young millennials 2 hours to get to work,
aren't going to do it.
You know what? It just makes places like North Carolina look all that more
attractive,
appealing.
Yep.
And so this, you know, aside from the community concerns, which are very real, I think as a state and certainly as, you know, state government, it's something we're paying more and more attention to because we're starting to hear,
you know,
that employers are having a harder time finding the folks that they need. We need to create what these young folks need to be able to stay.
You definitely do. And I think that older folks can contribute to that by maintaining, you know, these smaller communities within the community kind of thing, that where we end up contributing back into the community with our tax dollars, perhaps to a less degree than we did in our bigger houses. But that's that extra revenue that you get that helps offset those costs for schooling.
Right.
You know, we're not, I suppose in some cases if people ended up having grandchildren, you know, back to the opiate thing, that ended up having grandchildren live with them, you might have those occasional situations. But at any rate, now I want to make sure that we haven't left anything out for this session because we're getting close to the end of time. We've talked about housing. We talked just briefly about the infrastructure. You want to go back to the gas issue?
Yeah, that is.
We've got just a couple minutes.
That is something that's important, most specifically because I have a very large footprint of gas in my district. And not so much here in Holliston, but Hopkinton, I think, is probably one of the most impacted communities by Eversource anywhere in this area. So you may not know there are large LNG tanks in Hopkinton, which are some of the largest in the region.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And commensurate with that in Southborough, which is also in my district, they have the SCADA facility, which is the safety oversight facility for that LNG tank as well as all the other gas infrastructure in the district. So in light of the terrible events in Merrimack late last year, there's been a much closer look at gas safety. We've been looking legislatively at gas leaks for a very long time and had passed some legislation that requires them to upgrade gas leaks. But really to better understand the lay of the land, I hosted a tour of Eversource for town officials, for my legislative colleagues in Hopkinton to look and see that site, see on the ground what safety protocols were put in place and what would happen, you know, if something appeared to be going wrong. And then we all went over to Southborough to see from kind of the big screens, you know, the safety central over there, again, to just get a comfort level with how things were being overseen. And it was a great tour, but one of the things that concerned me as a legislator was when we had our public hearings after the Merrimack instance, we kept being assured by the infrastructure providers that everything was safe.
Yeah.
But then you ask them, well, what does that mean, safe? You know, is there any uniform definition that we can be assured when you say it's safe that you're complying with certain things? And there really, surprisingly, isn't.
Yeah, it's like pharma and cigarettes.
Yeah, these.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, these companies
really
we're sort of, you know, trusting them in many ways to do what needs to be done to keep us safe. So that is changing, and there's much more state oversight.
As a Yeah, anyway, after all of that, there were reports that they had some leaks. They knew that they had some places in which there were problems that hadn't been addressed. So I don't think it's really a good idea to take it for granted. I also think that the state needs to invest in its own inspection network kind of thing so that there's somebody watching. Because no, I don't. So anyway.
And one of the bills I filed for this session does exactly that. It requires more inspections, and it also requires more qualified engineering oversight of a lot of these improvements that are being made, so we can be sure that they're...
And then you have to make sure it's in the budget to make sure that it's funded, and that's the trick. We always put in these wonderful things that should be done, and then we don't fund the staff people, you know, and sadly.
And to some extent, you know, the industry has to pony up and make sure that their infrastructure is safe.
Absolutely. Or there should be penalties against them that are threatening enough that they can, that they're less likely to let them slide. Carolyn, I know you need to get someplace, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to say goodbye to you on this one. I'll see you in 3 months.
I think we've got a date on the calendar already, right, Mary?
We have a date on the calendar, and I like it. It's very helpful to have that date there. It kind of gets me focused back into it, you know.
Too.
So that's good. All right. Well, you have a good spring, and we'll be back soon. And thank you for listening today, and take care, and tune in. Bye-bye.